Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Adena Philips. I am on the Global Access Steering Committee, and I am also a member of the steering committee of AJC's Contemporary Jewish Life Commission. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this morning's AJC University session, Through Israel's Eyes, Perception of the Diaspora. Since 1948, U.S. Jews have opined, debate, considered at length our relationship to Israel. We wonder, what does it mean to be diaspora Jews choosing to live outside of Israel? What is our role in shaping Israeli policy? What is our responsibility to the Jewish state, and what are the boundaries around that responsibility? We talk about our needs and our desires to see our religious practices reflected here in Israel, and our dismay when they are absent at best or derided at worst. So we spend a lot of time thinking about our relationship to Israel, and sometimes it takes me back to a book I read in high school, The Fountainhead, which I'm guessing a bunch of people have read, where one of the protagonists pulls Howard Rourke aside and says, "I really want to know what you think of me. You can say it in any words, no one else is here, tell me everything, no one's listening, I really want to know." And he looks at him and he says, "But I don't think of you." And so while we ruminate in America, on the other side of the Atlantic, around this conversation, in other countries as well, it can sometimes feel like Israelis are not thinking very much about it at all. So even if there are disparate conversations going on this side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Atlantic, the one thing that we all agree, as shown by the just released 2018 AJC survey on American Jewish and Israeli opinion, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is that both populations overwhelmingly believe that a thriving diaspora is vital for the long-term future of the Jewish people. AJC has focused on this issue for many, many years, especially leading up to the conference, but just to bookend the conversation, we're sitting here in the Blaustein Hall, which is named for the Blaustein family, the first president of AJC, who famously initiated this conversation with David Ben-Gurion. And as we're sitting here in this room, we have a delegation from AJC's Jewish Religious Equality Coalition, Contemporary Jewish Life Commission, which I sit on, in Knesset right now, having these conversations. So just to bookend how long this conversation has extended here at AJC, and especially leading up to Global Forum, we're going to be talking today about the recently released survey results on this issue. In your welcome bags, all of you received a written symposium where AJC has collected 25 essays on this very topic, and several of our panelists today contributed. I contributed as well, and I hope that everyone will peruse through them and make them part of your conversations throughout the Global Forum and beyond. So in this session, we will try to understand how Israelis perceive diaspora Jews, and American Jews in particular. And just so our panelists know, I'm Canadian, so I'm not offended by anything you say, so you can speak freely. We are lucky to be joined today by really diverse, excellent panel to have a lively discussion on this topic. We have Einat Wilf, a former member of Knesset for the Labor Party from 2012 to 2013. She also contributed to the written symposium that I mentioned, and she has been a voice on this topic, and specifically on topics about young Israelis as well, which is, of course, very relevant to our discussion. We have Micah Goodman, Senior Fellow at the Hartman Institute, and also the CEO of Ein Prat, a unique yeshiva that engages a Jewish study institution that engages young adults across the religious and political spectrum. We have Uri Misgav of Haaretz, who's been an outspoken voice on many issues and on a voice for Israeli liberals, and has written a lot about the patterns that we're going to talk about today and the growing divide around support for Israel among U.S. Jews. And the conversation will be moderated by Rabbi Dov Lipman, also a contributor to this written symposium that you have, member of Knesset for Yesh Atid from 2013 to 2015. And in addition to service in Knesset, He's also been an activist against extremism and religious coercion. So thank you for being with us. Very much looking forward to a lively discussion. And with that, pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's really wonderful to see a full room at a 9 o'clock session. That's not the norm, so it says a lot about all of you and your dedication to this topic, to AJC, and to everything that is happening during this global forum. If I can, for a moment, I just want to tell a quick anecdote to paint a picture and a background to the discussion that we're going to be having today. It was actually a very shocking moment for me. As someone who grew up in the United States, lived in America for 32 years, made Aliyah 14 years ago, and actually got involved in politics because of the issues of religion and state. I saw issues on the ground in my city where I live in Beit Shemesh, where I saw a very fractious Israel and the tensions between the different groups in Israel. That's what brought me to politics. And once I got to the Knesset, I started realizing that we have so much work to do, not just in Israel, but on the Israel-diaspora relationship on these issues. I was hosting a group of rabbis in the Knesset, and a conservative rabbi from Pennsylvania, in the middle of discussion, she said that while she was in negotiations for her contract, for her new position, the board of directors of the synagogue told her that the putting into the contract that one of the conditions for her employment is that she not talk about Israel from the pulpit. And that was a moment for me where I said, oh my goodness, we are absolutely losing. If it could get to the point where that's a condition of employment for a rabbi, and this is just the beginning of a break of immense proportions. And it was very difficult for me to hear that. In this particular case, she did not agree to that condition, but just the fact that it was raised made me realize how difficult this is. And I started actually traveling around North America to synagogues, temples, community centers to talk about the importance of the Israel-diaspora relationship. And then I reached a college campus where a young man who grew up in a Zionistic home, went to a Jewish day school of some form. He's a leading activist on campus. He says to me, I don't know if I can keep doing this anymore, because here I am putting myself on the line for a country which I don't feel really welcomes me. That was another moment which made me realize we're in trouble. Because these young college activists, if we don't have them and we lose the college campuses, then I say to myself, aside from what happens amongst diaspora, Jewry and Israel, what happens to U.S. relations with Israel as today's college students are eventually the members of Congress who we so rely upon in Israel? So there's so many levels to this conversation. When I read the AJC poll, and we're going to actually use that as the basis of the conversation today, there were some glaring statistics, which actually, some of them didn't shock me, and some of them just really blew my mind as I read them. I'm just going to highlight 3. On the issue of space for mixed prayer at the Kotel, U.S. Jewry, 73% support a mixed prayer, a place for mixed gender prayer at the Kotel. In Israel, 42%. It's a massive, massive gap. On the issue of, is growth of non-Orthodox population in Israel, meaning not secular, but to reform conservative other streams, will that improve Jewish life in Israel? U.S. Jews, 43% say would improve it. Israelis, 26% say they would improve it. And then finally, an issue which I'm not going to focus on today. As an Israeli politician, we don't really talk much about U.S. politics, but it just frames the picture on how the current U.S. president is doing in terms of the relationship with Israel. The United States Jewry, 34% approve. Israelis, 77% approve. So just there's a gap here, where there's a gap here, and as I travel around the United States, I actually started discovering we're not talking the same language. We're just not. And in order to solve any conflict or to heal any wound, we have to at least understand where the other side is coming from. And that's what today's session is about. We have three excellent representatives of Israel, people who have grown up in Israel, lived in Israel, people who are experts on this topic from different perspectives to help you as American Jews try to understand a little bit more where Israel and Israelis are coming from on this issue as perhaps a first step towards healing these wounds. It was mentioned that there's a committee going on right now in the Knesset about this topic. I was invited to that hearing, and it's important to have them, but we've had so many hearings in the Knesset and talked about this issue, and I think that what we're doing here today is actually the most critical for American Jews to hear from Israelis, and then you will also have a chance to ask your questions to our excellent panelists to try to understand even more. So for our first part of this session, I want to give each of our panelists actually a chance just for a few minutes. We're not going to talk about specific issues. We'll get to the issues in a few minutes. But just from their perspective, you know, it shows in the poll, and it was mentioned, that 78% of Israelis see diaspora Jews as members of their family, whether it's siblings, first cousins, extended, but they do see them as part of their family. So with that background, we're going to go one by one here in no specific order to try to understand from your perspective, how does the average Israeli Jew look at it's diaspora Jews in general, but we'll focus in right now on American Jews. So we'll just go down the line, and Uri, we'll start with you. How do you see Israeli Jews seeing diaspora Jews and American Jews?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming and having me over. I can't talk for the average Israeli. I belong to a minority in Israel at the moment, the liberal, Democrat, secular minority. So I will talk from that point of view. You know, let's talk about this family issue. We have a saying in Hebrew, "Mishpacha lo bocharim." You don't get to pick, you don't choose your family. So when I talk about my family, of course I pick and I love my American cousins. Danit, Amit, Noah, and Josh Whaley. They're the children of my aunt. We're always family. I was always interested in them. They were interested in coming over. But is Mr. David Friedman, the current US ambassador, a member of my family? Do I want him as a family? I'm going to be honest here. I hope it's not too blunt. No. He just told Israeli journalists to keep their mouth shut regarding the Gaza issue a few days ago. So I don't think he wants me in his family. Do I pick Mr. Gerald Kushner as my family? If I do, it means that Trump is in my family. So I have mixed feelings about it, and I want to be a bit critical about the Israeli part. If 78% of Israeli Jews regard diaspora or American Jews as their family, how does it match with the other numbers? They don't want them in the mixed prayer in the Kotel. They don't even want them as Jews if they're conservative or reforms. The gap is a problem for the Israeli side, not for the American side, in my opinion at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to some of the points that you made in a moment, because I think there were some very strong statements that need us to plumb the depths of a little bit more. But Einat, let me give it over to you just for a original statement regarding the way you see the relationship.
Okay, so good morning. Is it working?
She doesn't just have a very loud voice, she has a microphone that's hooked up to her.
I'm not tapping. So good morning. I'm Israeli born and raised. Nothing in my background would lead me, indeed, to be interested, like you said, to think about the other side. The English, by the way, the happy coincidence, my father did a postdoc when I was in 4th grade, but Israeli born and raised. And my journey in terms of being interested in general began when, as a girl of 16, I was sent by Israel. They have this program of teenagers. They send us young ambassadors to demonstrate that Israelis are normal to other teenagers around the world. I asked to be assigned to New York. I got upstate New York. And when when I was speaking there, we normally spoke to non-Jews in high schools, but once we spoke to a Jewish audience. And after we did our spiel, one young man there said, okay, we heard what you have to say. What's the best thing we can do for Israel? So I'm 16, the outcome of the Israeli secular, mamlachti educational system. I have only one answer, and the answer is, of course, make aliyah. And it was silent. And then the young man raises his hand again, and he says, what's the second best thing we can do for Israel? And for me, that was the beginning of a journey to figure out this relationship, to rethink this relationship. And I've written a lot about how to make this relationship really one of equals. And I very much belong to those who view it as a family, as a tribe, and that the state of Israel is very much the project and the most exciting project of that entire tribe, both those who live here and don't live here. And for me, that is a key element of my vision. But I do recognize that we have sometimes an inability to speak together. I have a colleague at the Jewish People Policy Institute. His name is Shlomo Fisher. He wrote a beautiful piece. I recommend you find it. It's called American Jews Are Protestants and Israeli Jews Are Catholics. And the essence is that American Jews view religion in an American way. Progress, being progressive, can work with being religious. Israelis, coming from the Zionist European tradition, think of religion as a hindrance to progress. So in Israel, the liberal, progressive voices are likely to be, like I like to call them, the shrimp-eating Shabbat driving Jews. So, for example, the numbers on the Kotel, you said those who support mixed prayer at the Kotel. There's apparently not enough of that. I can tell you that the problem for me is not mixed. It's prayer at the Kotel. I mean, seriously, A, there's no God. B, he's not there anywhere more than anywhere else. So for American Jews seeking to make change in Israel for greater pluralism, the problem is they have one Dov Lipman who's really nice, who's of their kind. But other than that, to make change in Israel, the choice is between two big populations. And in politics, you need numbers, not the nice people. So one group is the one who cares about religion, about prayer at the Kotel. They're likely to have a religious interpretation of Judaism that's not reform and conservative. Or if you want the ones who care about feminism, pluralism, equality, they are not going to care about the Kotel, certainly not as a prayer place. And the question is, who are your allies? You're not going to find people, again, not more than one mandate in the Knesset. You're not going to find people who both deeply care about religion and about progressive values. So you have to choose, and that's the art of politics in Israel. And I personally say, choose us, leave the Kotel for now, let's work on other things that really matter for progressive issues in Israel.
Okay, so we are already getting into some pretty heavy statements, but also understanding a little more. And I'm going to follow up with everyone about things that they've said, but I want to give Micah a chance for some opening words on this topic.
Does this work? Right. So I think we've seen this relationship transforming 3 times. In 1948, and for the first years of Israel, American Jews cared about Israel, and they had compassion for Israelis and mercy for Israelis. We were a third world country. We were one big refugee camp of all Jews from many places in the world. We needed your help. You came to help us. But compassion is an emotion that, like Aristotle says, it generates action, which is what emotions are supposed to do, but also reflects a separateness. When you have compassion for someone, you're also happy you're not that someone. 1967 changes everything. A new emotion is born. Now, it's not compassion anymore. When in 6 days we destroy 3 armies, and in 6 days more than triple the size of our country, while the United States of America is losing in Vietnam. Suddenly American Jews look at Israel and they don't have compassion, they don't have mercy. It's not about rachmanut anymore. They look at Israel, the little state that could. And now there is a new emotion, which is pride. Now, pride is a different emotion. Like compassion, it generates action. You want to help them out. But now, there's also an identity component. You identify with them. You want to be like them. Like great fans of a sports team. The ones with, all the gear. Yeah. Like in the NBA. So in Israel, we have Hapoel Yerushalayim. Hapoel Tel Aviv. Adif Hapoel Yerushalayim. אבל אחר כך, so a real fan doesn't say the team lost. What does a real fan say? We lost. Because when you're a real fan, your team becomes a part of who you are. And Israel became a part of the identity of American Jews. Jonathan Sarna, the great historian of American Judaism, said Israel became the religion of American Jews. It became a part of who they are. It expanded their identity. Religion was down, Israel was up, and now you have a purpose in life, a sense of belonging. A great philosopher, Mordechai Kaplan, said, the great challenge of Judaism in modern times is shifting from believing to belonging. It's not what you believe in, it's who you belong to. And the 6-Day War turned Israel into something that American Jews could belong to. This is a long story. I'll tell it shortly. After a few decades, First Intifada, Second Intifada, young Americans looking at Israel, and a new emotion is born. It's not compassion. It's not pride. It's embarrassment. Embarrassment is a different kind of an emotion. When you're embarrassed of someone, you don't want to be affiliated with that someone. Now there is separateness. And the fourth emotion, which is the most dangerous emotion, which is no emotion at all. Indifference. If we are walking from a world of embarrassment to a world of indifference, we're in real trouble. Now, here's a mistake we make, Israelis. By the way, I'm an Israeli, like you, born and raised. How's my accent? It's great. I've been faking it for about 15 years. But like you, I had something in my biography helped me out. I was actually never in the States for more than a few weeks, but my mom is from Oklahoma City. So that helps. And my dad is from Springfield, Massachusetts. And they met in Bolivia in the Peace Corps. And my mom was a Roman Catholic. Anyway, it's a story. And they're celebrating their 50th anniversary in a few months. So anyway, so yeah, I was out. So she converted the king to, so it's a big story, but I don't think that's why you're here now. So how do we Israelis react to the shifts and turns of the relationship between us and world Jewry and American Jewry? I'll tell you what we're suffering from. We used to be admired by American Jews. And you know the stories about a rock star that suddenly people stopped admiring him? You know that story? What happens to great rock stars or movie stars that everyone loved them, then they look around and they ask, where are all my fans? What happens to them? They start doing drugs. That's okay, we're not going to do that. But we want the love back. See us like you saw us in Entebbe, please. See us like you saw us after the 6-Day War. And then we make the mistake of trying to get the love back. And we start doing advocacy. Now, I'm not against advocacy. I know many of you are into advocacy. Hasbara is important. To explain Israel to the world is important. We could do it better, but in a more sophisticated way, but it's important. I don't think Israel should do Hasbara to Jews. We have to move in to a different place. Okay, now it's not about performing to an audience and hoping the audience will clap hands. Now we have to think about not Israel as players and the diaspora Jews as the audience, and we want you to clap. Now we have to enter the mature stage of our relationship, and that is the stage of partnership. It's not that we're the heroes and you're admiring us, or we screw up and you are upset with us. That still maintains the paradigm that we're playing the game and you're observing and we just want you to be our fans. Partnership means, and what is the condition for partnership? I think there's two conditions for partnership. I'm a very big fan of, I like listening to people, to great speakers. And a few weeks ago, I won't say who, I listened on YouTube to a great speaker. And suddenly, in the middle of his great speech, he lost a word. He was trying to think of the word. He was like, you know what the audience did immediately? They started yelling words at him. They were helping him out. And I thought, did he plan this? Did he fake losing the word in order to make the audience engage? Probably not. It was very authentic. But here's the thing. When you make mistakes, you might lose your audience as fans, but you gain them as partners. The fact that Israel screws up sometimes, the fact that we make mistakes, that's very bad for Hasbara. But that's very good in creating a sense that we need you. And there is room for you in this conversation. You see, nobody wants to join a partnership with a losing team. We have to be impressive. We also have to be imperfect. When you're impressive, you want to join, when someone's impressive, you want to join him or her. But if they're perfect, there's no room for you in their world and their life. Israel is impressive. Let's admit that. Israel is far from perfect. Let's admit that. I think having a vulnerable relationship where we know our strength and yet we admit our mistakes that's the space where we could partner. It's not anymore about compassion, helping out the weak people, pride, being a fan of the winning team, or embarrassment, they're not what we thought we were. Let's make the fourth stage about partnership, about realizing Israel's strengths, not denying its weaknesses, and there is room for everyone in this very important relationship as a partnership. Thank you.
So I want to ask a few follow-up questions on some of the things that were said. Uri, I'm going to start with you because I was startled. I'm being very honest. I was startled by the statement that you made that, okay, I can understand that there's a wide gap in ideology and theology, philosophy on life between you and the current ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. But to make the statement, I don't want him in my family, that seems to be a statement of there's really nothing that can be done here, and we have this break, and that's the way it's going to be. So did you intend it that way, or do you see a way to try to heal that gap between the two of you and the two camps that you represent?
First, I don't think he wants me in his family, so it makes two of us. But I will be very direct about it. When I spoke to American students, mainly Jewish American students, a few years ago in the States, I kept telling them one motto. In order to support Israel, you don't have to support the Israeli government. You're nodding, Dov, but you, as a liberal Jew and a liberal Israeli, you, as an NP, didn't have a choice, and you took part in a right-wing nationalistic government around here. That's all the compromises that we do all the time, but I don't have to do them because I'm just a journalist, you know. And so again, supporting Israel, in my opinion, at the moment, if you're a liberal Democrat Jew in America, supporting Israel is not supporting the Israeli government. It's supporting the opposition, it's supporting the values that Einat talked about them earlier. And it was a great speech, but I beg to differ. I think at the moment, most Israelis, and again, excuse my French, don't mind about American Jews. They don't care so much about American Jews and what they think about them. You know why? Because we have Trump. The American government loves us. David Friedman loves us and loves the settlements. And so we don't need to look for this love that we used to do for years. And I think if I can give a little advice, I'm not an expert as my two colleagues here, what the liberal Democrat Jew camp in the States at the moment, and it doesn't mean if people are secular or a little bit religious, or it doesn't matter. If the high values are now defending the liberal Democrat camp in the States and in Israel, that should be the alliance and nothing else.
Micha, any response to that point that perhaps in today's world, today's political reality, where there seems to be, we saw before the numbers, close to 80% of Israelis are approve of the current president's policies, and is that going to widen the gap between Israel and diaspora Jewry, or do you not see the trend the way Uri mentioned?
Here I agree with Uri. Israel is facing a long-term problem. Because of the very strong rejection of the majority of American Jews of President Trump, and the strong linkage of President Trump with the Netanyahu government in Israel, so psychologically, the rejection of Trump is turning into a rejection of Israel for many Jews. So it means there might be a short-term gain here for Israel, but we might be Trump is not going to stay forever, and on the long term, we might be in trouble. Not only because of losing American Jewry, but because of losing one of Israel's most greatest strategic assets, and that is the bipartisan support in Israel. So this is, I agree with you 100%. And furthermore, I think that Israel is not only thinking I'm not saying that we shouldn't take advantage of the political moment, but we shouldn't be arrogant and reject and not listen to the opposition in the United States. Democrats, liberals, and liberal Jews. That's a very big mistake. That's being very short-sighted. And one of the problems of politics today is that we always think short-term for the quick gain. That has everything to do, by the way, with politics taking place in social media, where you have a need for an immediate gain, and all over the world, we're losing the ability to think about the long term. So here, me and you actually agree.
So Uri mentioned a line, which is a line that I use whenever I travel around North America about supporting Israel, even if you disagree with the policies. I don't say that our country is perfect, but we can't ignore the issues that are on the table, because those issues are what's distancing American Jews from Israel. So I want to start actually getting into some of the issues themselves. And Einat, I'll start with you, because we talked about the Kotel, which has been, certainly for American Jewry, it's a major, major issue. And Einat, you basically said, and I agree with your analysis about the Israelis that care about the Kotel are the ones who are going to say no, and the Israelis don't care about the Kotel, don't care about the Kotel. Are you therefore looking at a room full of American Jews and telling them that perhaps strategically they should focus on other issues and perhaps pull away from the issue of the Western Wall, which is not gaining any steam in Israel and perhaps only pulling us further and further apart?
Certainly. I mean, I think, first of all, there has to be an understanding that Israel and Israelis and the way that we think about ritual and prayer and all of these issues are very, very different. Really, that insight that in Israel, progressive values, by and large, are going to be associated with a very hostile attitude towards religious practice. But there are other issues that we can cooperate and cooperate very well under the broad headline that I call taking down the Rabbanut. Because at the end of the day, if I look at the entire Zionist enterprise, there's not a lot of phrases that sound better in politics in Hebrew than they do in English, but this one does. And I call it from Rabbanut leRibonut, from rabbinate to sovereignty. This is the story of Zionism. The story of Zionism is about pulling away from a system designed for people in exile to a system for a people who are masters of their fate. Part of it is about taking down that vestige of a system of a people in exile called the Rabbanut. Now, to understand how you take it down is to understand that it has nothing to do with Judaism, and everything to do with monopoly power granted by the government. The best comparison for the Rabbanut is the Israel Electric Company or the Israeli Airport Authority. Monopolies that get their power from the elected government, and only the elected government can take it away. And if you know anything about competition, What the Rabbanut is doing is not Judaism. What the Rabbanut is doing is protecting its monopoly power against any threats. So what you need to bring to the table is not nice conversation about Jewish values. What you need to bring to the table is cold, hard thinking about competitiveness, how to bring down monopolies, and how to create political alliances with Israelis who might not share your vision of prayer and ritual, but share your values of feminism and liberalism and pluralism. But it's a very, very different kind of conversation. And I want to say in this context and to your talk, I think the key issue here is really the question of power. What Israelis have done and what Jews have done is take power again. The entire process of Zionism is to be a people with power. And that is something the Jews who are still in minority situations are under tremendous pressure to disavow. So part of engaging with Israel is truly feeling comfortable with the easy parts of power, winning the 1967 war, and the tough elements of power, which are 50 years later, what do you do with it? But ultimately, what we need from you is a discussion that understands that ultimately here in Israel, it's cold, hard politics, numbers matters, power matter. We can discuss Judaism. It's not about Judaism.
So this is a point that Einat is making right now, which I hope everyone understands the wisdom and the power behind them, because Israelis do have life cycle events, the parts of their life which are impacted by this Rabbanut domination, which really bothers them. And if those were the issues that we were speaking about together, then perhaps we could bridge that gap, and perhaps Uri and Jared Kushner could even sit together and work together on this issue. So we're getting towards a strategy here, which I think is wonderful. Micah, I know you want to comment on this point.
I think that numbers-wise, most Israelis and most Americans actually agree that the relationship between synagogue and state in Israel is distorted. Most Israelis think that Orthodox rabbis owning Judaism in Israel is not healthy, it's distorted, it should be changed. Most American Jews agree. Now, it might be for different reasons, but we actually agree on this. So you ask the great question, the great enigma. How is it that ultra-Orthodoxy in Israel is roughly 10%, a minority, a growing minority, but a minority, and still a minority, and yet it owns majority of the power on this issue? How is it? Well, there's many ways to answer this question, but I think there is also, it's not only about the Israeli political system, it's also about the public's political will. Politics, as we all know, and you two definitely know, is the art of compromise. You're a journalist, you don't have to practice that art. It's the art of compromise. Thank God. And politicians, what they always do, and I guess what they need to do, is sacrifice something they believe in order to promote something they believe in. Right? That's what we're always upset by politicians that sacrifice something they believed in. We think they're not doing their job. We don't always understand that they are doing their job. That's their job. To give up something they believe in order to promote something that they believe in. And I'll tell you what's the compromise that Israeli politicians do all the time. They know the Israeli public wants to reform the relationship between synagogue and state in Israel. They also know the Israeli public wants other things. They'll always sacrifice synagogue and state in order to promote other things, specifically the agenda about the conflict or agenda about economics. You see, the main problem is not that Israelis don't agree with you guys about synagogue and state. They want the same. They just don't care enough about it. If this would be a priority, politicians would sacrifice other things in order to make political deals and trade horses in order to break the monopoly of orthodoxy and ultra-orthodoxy over religion in Israel. So what really needs to change is, you don't have to change Israelis' minds. They're there. They just don't care enough. And the reason why they don't care enough is because they think that other issues are more important. And by the way, the other issues are the conflict with the Palestinians and the future of settlements and peace. So my analysis is the following. The fact that the conflict is so central in the hearts and minds of Israelis that it hijacked all other issues. You're asking Israelis, why don't you have a constitution? We should have a constitution. Let's wait till we end the conflict, we'll deal with it. Einat says we shouldn't. Yes. Why is it that rabbis own Judaism in Israel? You're right, let's take care of that. You know when? After the conflict. And as a result, the conflict is holding all other issues as hostages. Maybe we should think about this differently. Maybe if we change the way we think about the conflict, we could change the way we think about other issues. Maybe if we realize that the conflict is an important issue, but not the only issue, and we shouldn't sacrifice all our political capital to solve the conflict, especially, by the way, when it doesn't seem very solvable. That's the absurd here. Then we could liberate the hostages and start talking to them. The vision shouldn't be neglecting the conflict. The vision should be if the conflict won't be the only topic we sacrifice political capital for, but one of the topics dominating the Israeli conversation, then I think, if you agree with my analysis, there'll be more room to think, discuss, and make compromises, and to promote a better relationship, a healthier relationship between synagogue and state in Israel. By the way, vast majority in Israel want to transform it the following way. Yoter Yahadut, pachot kfiyah, which means more Jewish education and no religious legislation. That's where most Israelis want to go. If they would think about the conflict differently, they would go there. Which means, by the way, when you tell Israelis, we want two things from you: to cancel the monopoly of the rabbinate and to make peace. You should know that you're asking both, what we'll always do is sacrifice rabbinate for peace. And since peace doesn't seem like it's going to come, we're losing both. Maybe ask one thing for us. The Jewish state should start taking its Jewishness seriously. Make that a priority. We'll make that a priority. The minority of the population, the ultra-Orthodox, will become a minority of the power.
We want to get to the point where the audience can ask questions as well, but I do want to ask one quick round question, each of you very quickly to comment on. And the question is, I noticed in my time in Knesset that the average Israeli, and I'm not talking about religious, I'm talking about even secular Israelis, had a complete misunderstanding from my perspective, and even a negative perspective towards the non-Orthodox streams. Complete lack of understanding of what that is, what it's all about. We're in a room here filled with American Jewish leaders. Do you have any comment to them about what perhaps they can do? Can they do something to change that perspective amongst Israelis? Or is it that we can't do anything about it, it's just the situation, we have to deal with it?
In my opinion, the word is ignorance. It's really pure and solid ignorance and indifference, because we don't practice this here. And Micah is talking a lot about Orthodox Jews, the minority, but let's talk about, not Orthodox Haredim, but most, yes, but yes, most Israelis don't practice and don't know anything about the other streams that are so popular within the American Jews. I want to say a personal thing about my real family, my cousins. Looking back 3 and 2 decades ago, whenever we got together, they will talk to me until the middle of the night about Jewish identity, Zionist identity, Israeli identity. I always told them, I'm not really bothered by these questions because I live here, so I don't check myself every morning how much Jewish I am, how much Zionist I am, how much Israeli I am. But you know what happened in the last decade? They lost interest because they can't identify anymore. As you know, they're exactly like me. They were always were. They were liberal, Democrats, Jews living in the States and not in Tel Aviv or in the kibbutz where I grew up. They lost interest. My brother-in-law, Nate Fish, he used to be a baseball and a baseball player and coach. He came here 5 years ago to establish and push up the Israeli Baseball League. He was the commissioner for 3 years, running from school to school, teaching children what is baseball. They're more ignorant about baseball, by the way, than about reform and conservative. He did a great job here, but a few days before he left, and I told him, "Oh, Nate, you used to eat at our table every Monday and Thursday," because he lived in my street in Yafo. "What am I going to do without you? We're such close friends for 3 years." And he looked at me and he told me, "This place you live in is crazy." And you know what happened? He never looked back. I'm hardly in touch with him since he went back to the States, because it was too hard for him to merge this great place. You know, Tel Aviv is a great place. It's a great city. We go to the beach, we party, we go to restaurants, we go to bars. It's very expensive, but we manage. But he found it very hard to merge this normality with the absurdness you've seen everywhere in the political field, in the conflict field, and in other values. And so I think it's not a coincidence that he never looked back since he went back to the States. This is a big challenge for us Israelis, but except a few people, I don't think many people address that challenge or even understand it's a challenge at the moment.
Okay, so we're going to actually, on that note, shift to the, I understand there are a lot of questions amongst the audience. Einat and Micah, certainly you can address the issue of the non-Orthodox streams as we're answering the questions. We have a microphone that will go around the room. I ask everyone, when you ask your questions, 1-2 sentences maximum with a question mark at the end of that second sentence, so we can give the panelists a chance to answer the questions. So please just raise your hands and we'll bring the microphone around.
Thank you.
You're on.
Thank you all very much. Ann Myers from Cleveland. AJC is a nonpartisan organization. Question: how much do Israelis understand the fragility of this administration and the potential that that the administration, even as it exists in power, will change its mind about Israeli policy and perhaps not be what Israelis think it is? Thank you.
So I'm happy to take that, because one of the things when people kind of feel uncomfortable about this relationship with the current American administration, especially the president, is I like to say that one man who has done most in the 20th century for the Jewish people, not a Jew, the man who's truly responsible for most Jews being saved and for the state of Israel existing, his name is Joseph Stalin. Throughout the 40s and until 1950, no one has done more than him. I know every American conference opens with Harry Truman having recognized Israel after 11 minutes, and then he went on to establish an embargo. So thanks, but a bit of a problem. The Soviets actually sent us arms that made the establishment of the modern state of Israel possible. Through the Czechs. Czechoslovakia was the way to send those arms, but it was the Soviets. And they supported us, and no one has done more, and we can talk also about them winning World War II. But basically, this is the man that has done most for the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Now, say what you will about Trump, he's not in Stalin's league. So what I'd like to say is that part of the Jews coming back to be masters of their fate, as sovereign people with power and history, is that we pursue our interests. We pursue our interests with the people who can help us, keenly aware that it's temporary. By 51, Uri's kibbutz now, by 51, the Soviets were over in their support and turned around. And then we went to the French, And then de Gaulle turned on us, but in the meantime, we built a few things nicely from the French. And then, after the French, we moved to the Americans. And the basic notion is part of coming back to being a player in history is working to pursue our interests with whoever has power and whoever can help us. And that's the thing that might be unpalatable, might be not nice, but really this is what being sovereign is all about. Being sovereign is working with all the unpalatable people in the world to pursue your distinct interests. And this is what our Prime Minister is doing. And our Prime Minister, at the end of the day, like him or not, he's pursuing the classic Jewish strategy. I like to call the classic Jewish strategy, I call it the blowfish strategy. We have one purpose in this world, and we pursue it with fighter planes and Nobel Prizes. Our purpose in the world is to make sure that no one realizes there's only 16 million of us. We know that the moment the world knows that, we're toast. So we make up things like Judeo-Christian civilization, which is really hogwash. Or when we meet Chinese, we talk about two ancient civilizations. Or our Prime Minister makes sure to be seen with Trump and Putin and Modi and to project power. But he, more than anyone, I can assure you, knows our real sides. So this is what it means to be a people, a state, a sovereign people. And if it means working with this guy, we'll work with this guy. And then there'll be another guy, and we'll work with another, hopefully, gal. But that is the essence of being a modern sovereign state.
Okay. Next question.
Well, before my head explodes from Joseph Stalin, I'm Elliot Malman. I'm a conservative rabbi in New Jersey. I speak about Israel every week. So we have a large range of people, both in this audience and in American Jewry. To make it brief, quick questions. Do Israelis recognize that the diaspora-Israel relationship is necessary for Israeli national security? Number one. Looking out here, a crane, looking all over Jerusalem, looking at the changing infrastructure of the city, of the country. This is a metaphor for the Israel-diaspora relationship. The infrastructure of this relationship is changing. Can you address the change that needs to happen both in narrative and in policy and in institutions? Big questions.
Right. Let's zero in on the national security question in particular, because that's one which we haven't really talked about. We've been talking about family and tribe, but in terms of the strategic side of it. Uri.
Before I hand it off to Micha, let me tell you a secret. There is no such thing anymore as Israelis. You have to stop asking what Israelis think, because we have established the two-state solution already. If you want to get an idea of the two-state solution inside Israel, I suggest the next AJC conference will be held in Tel Aviv. And then you'll see the Jerusalem state and the Tel Aviv state. It's very hard to say these days what Israelis think or understand. To your question, I think liberal, Democrat, secular Israelis understand how important those questions are, even in matter of national security. If you ask the Jerusalem state, at the moment with Mr. Friedman, Mr. Kushner, and Mr. Trump, I don't think they understand any of it. They feel very safe at the moment.
Okay. Micha's gonna... Okay, fine. We'll go on to the next question then.
I'm Jonathan Dorfman from Boston. You spoke about creating alternatives to the rabbinate, religious alternatives. Can you speak about indigenous prospects for that? We're in a building that I suspect doesn't gain a lot of traction within Israel. How do you create this indigenously?
Micha.
So I think Uri's description of Israel as splitting into two, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, I think it's a caricature of Israel. Uri, with all due respect, I don't think that's what's happening in Israel. I have a different understanding of what's happening in Israel. And it's more in the lines of the assumptions in your question. If we try to draw Israel, the caricature of Israel looks like this. We have a right-wing religious camp, left-wing liberal secular camp. That's a two-state solution, like Uri put it. Those are the two Israels, and that's where the conflict is. I don't think that's the truth. I'll tell you where the real civil war is going on. It's going within religious Israel and within secular Israel. There's an important sociologist called Kimi Kaplan and also a reporter from your newspaper, Yair Ettinger, that are describing a split within the Dati religious community in Israel. I'm not talking about Haredi Israel, but religious Zionists. And you have a split going like this. On the one hand, you have a group that's becoming more passionate and more extreme than ever, shutting down to modernity, freezing all forms of change. At the same time, and in parallel, you have a growing group, growing in numbers and in passion, that want to open Judaism and embrace change. Who do you think their enemy is? Their cultural enemy, obviously. Not secular Israelis, but the extreme religious Israelis. That's where the conflict is. There is an important researcher from Be'er Sheva University, Gidon Katz, that observed that the same thing is happening within the secular community in Israel. We have on the one hand secular Israelis that reject Judaism more than ever. They see Judaism as a threat to our democracy. An important paper written by Adena Philips sees Leil Seder, celebrating Seder, as a threat to our democracy. A lot of the articles written by Uri, which I read you and enjoy what you say, promote the notion that Judaism as a religion is a threat to liberal values. But at the same time, you have in growing numbers secular Israelis trying to be inspired by religion and yet not controlled by religion. Opening up to tradition without being swallowed by tradition. Now here's the thing. You have two communities being split. The real schism, the real battle of ideas, is not between secular Israel and religious Israel. It's within secular Israel and within religious Israel. Are you following me? If you're following me, so I want to offer one last observation. You know what happens when religious Israelis, which are open-minded and liberal thinking, meet secular Israelis that are inspired by Judaism and don't reject it and still secular? You know what happens when they meet? 99.9% of the situations, they recognize that they're closer to each other than they are to their original groups. That's the growing Israel. That's what I call the new Israeli mainstream. Are they going to take over and create an alternative institutions, an open-minded Judaism? Is that going to happen? I don't know. All I'm saying is, one option is to think that Orthodox Israel is going to grow in power and numbers and take over. But there is another option, that this double split will lead to a new connection, and that will take over. What do you rather, the crisis narrative or the opportunity narrative? For too many years, we're selling the crisis narrative. We should just notice that there might be good news around the corner.
I'm going to just add one sentence to that. It's what I wrote in the symposium that you all have, but it's also my very optimistic perspective on things in general. As the ultra-Orthodox population, which was not part of Micha's discussion right now, but as they become more integrated into Israeli society, which is happening, there's more in the army, more in higher education, more working than ever before. It's going to take decades for this process to play out, but the political juggernaut which stops Israel from making progress on this issue politically, I believe is going to fall away, because as the ultra-Orthodox population is growing in numbers, their political power is not growing. With that, the younger generation wants something else. The internet is coming to them. They see opportunity. And over time, we're going to see change even from the political side on the ultra-Orthodox angle, which is what's really holding us back on making progress on these issues. Okay, next question.
Lois Frank from Atlanta. I'd like to get back to the idea of American Jewry as advocates for Israel, because I do believe 70% or more of American Jews are progressive, on the progressive side, Democrats versus Republicans. But when progressives advocate on issues in Israel, such as feminism or the civil rights as seen on our side, there's a feeling that we may be undermining Israel with our elected officials, that to be critical of Israel in the secular side may in some way be undermining Israel's support by the American government in terms of foreign aid or whatever. So I would really like your counsel and help on that. We use NGOs, but even affiliation with NGOs, I'm going to cite a couple, one J Street, the other the New Israel Fund, is very controversial in certain parts of the Jewish community.
Okay, so maybe I'll address this because I think it really depends on which issues you support. I can tell you a bit about kind of my work with J Street and how I thought. When Jeremy just started J Street, I was a member of Parliament for Labor, and he approached me because he was still seeking legitimacy. No one was willing to meet him at the time. And I told him, look, Jeremy, I actually have no problem with what you prescribe or advocate. I'm a supporter of two states, Palestinian state, oppose the settlements, all fine. But what I do have a problem is that the way that you seem to approach things is, and this is also a fine line to what Uri said, you seem to somehow indicate that Israelis don't know what's good for them, that Israelis need to be made to see the light. They need to be steered to understand what's good. Now, I find this deeply offensive on a variety of levels. First of all, certainly as an elected official in one of the most representative parliaments in the world, but in general, it's a deeply paternalistic attitude. The one thing I think Israelis, and again, Uri might think we don't know what's good for us, but Uri's in Israel and we argue and we fight, but the notion that kind of coming and using American power levers to help us get to what's right is something that I find deeply, deeply problematic. And the other thing I told him is also that what I find also problematic is under the title of pro-Israel, aggregate quite a few people that, I'm sorry, between them and being pro-Israel, there's really nothing. So, and those are issues that I care about and I think are very difficult. So I think getting involved, for Jews around the world to get involved in shaping what Israel is on all aspects, for me, this is something that I advocate. I want Israel to be the project of all Jews. I believe this is the most exciting thing. Uri talked about Jews not caring anymore. I see something almost different. Mati Friedman, I'm sure you know, wonderful journalist, recently wrote about why all these new American Jewish writers are using Israel in their books. And he talked about the fact that ultimately what Israel is alive. And the fact that your cousin found it crazy, I thought it was a compliment. So there's something deeply alive in the argument, in the fighting, in the trying to figure out what goes on, and it's a source of energy. So I think feel free to be involved, but it's very different from giving sustenance to those who want to contend that Israelis don't know what's good for them, that they need to be seen and made to understand the light, and in general, Jews who believe, and this is something that I completely draw the line, who believe that in selling out Israel will somehow put them in good company in America. That is seriously where, if you're selling out the family, that's where I draw the line.
Uri, I'm going to give you a chance to address that and also weave it into your closing remarks. I'm going to go through the panelists, each one of you with a closing message for our audience, and then as moderator, I'll give myself the right to the last word.
Okay. I don't want to spoil the party. I'm not a party spoiler. I love parties. But I want to say it very simply. I don't think all of you have to be advocates all the time. There is something very strange within Israeli notion that American Jews we want their money, we want their support, we want their advocatism, but we don't want them to tell us what to do. I think this era has to end. American taxpayers, and of course American Jews who are not only American taxpayers but also donate a lot, have the right to advocate their values. And if your values are the Netanyahu-Trump alliance values, fair enough, advocate it. But if your values are progressive, Democrat, liberal, sometimes secular, or at least free of Orthodox, Rabbanut, etc., advocate these values. Support the Israeli Democrat, liberal, left camp here, because I'll tell you another secret. We're turning into a shrinking minority here. We used to run this place a few decades ago.
It's okay. It's okay.
And it's okay. History will change and hopefully change again. I'm a great optimist. I hope it's not going to be through progressive catastrophe. It's one of my historical favorite theory. Let's not hope for that. But I think you guys should be, put away your guilt feelings. You can advocate your values. That's all.
Thank you, Uri. And Einat and Micah, as you give your closing remarks, if you could also weave in something about the fight against anti-Semitism, which I understand was a question that some of the people in the audience had as well. So Einat.
So this fits in because I think at the end of the day, we need to understand what we're all engaged in still. I do a lot of work comparing feminism and Zionism and showing how these are actually similar movements in the sense that they are both born out of the modern idea of challenging hierarchy, challenging prescribed places, and that what women and Jews have been doing for the last 150 years is to challenge civilizations that believe that they have a proper role. Now, one of the things we need to understand is that when we challenge long-established power structures, there's going to be backlash. And what we are living still through is the backlash. There are two civilizations that are responsible for half of the world, Christianity, Western, and Islam, that were predicated on the assumption of Jewish powerlessness. That were predicated on the assumption that Jews are a relic. As I like to say, they got the first book right, but not the sequels. So basically, they're headed out the door. This is woven into the fabric of these civilizations, from children's stories to images to theology. It's deep, even if we've moved into a secular modern era. So the idea of Jews with real power, not imagined power, real power, in many ways still grates on those two civilizations. It's why the conflict is still so deep. It's why there is this media obsession with Israel, because Jews with real power is an affront. There's something wrong with it. They need to be put back in their proper place. They need to go back to being good Jews who feel uncomfortable with power, who renounce power, renounce Zionism, which is the expression of Jewish power. So for me, whether you advocate your values or participate or all of this, we need to understand that the far bigger picture is that we're involved still in a deep historical struggle to get half of humanity to feel entirely comfortable with the fact that Jews have actual power.
Thank you, Einat. Micah, last words?
A very important idea described by the Buddha 2,600 years ago is that we'll always suffer, and good luck with life, by the way, and that there'll always be problems, and you never solve problems, you only change problems. So we used to have a big problem that we were powerless. We solved that problem, and now we have a new problem that we're powerful. By the way, I rather this problem. It's a better problem to have. But let's remember that it's a problem. In my academic work, I deal with Jewish philosophy in the Middle Ages. And you listen to Jewish scholars and Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages, and you realize that there's two big dreams that they cultivated. One dream has to do with anti-Semitism. We wanted people to love us, to accept us. Jews love love. And there was a second dream. We wanted power and sovereignty and independence. And in the 19th century, both dreams turned into ideologies. The dream to be accepted was called emancipation. The dream to have independence and sovereignty was called Zionism. And then in the 20th century, both dreams become a reality. American Judaism are enjoying complete emancipation, complete acceptance. Yes, I know there might be undercurrents, but let's admit it. Americans arrived. They're at home in America. And they're accepted, and they're powerful, and they're successful. And as someone put it, not only are they accepted, today they're the ones who accept others. What is more American than Seinfeld, as someone put it once? What is more Jewish than Seinfeld? In Israel, we have sovereignty and power and independence, and we're very successful, startup nation and all that. So here's the question. For many, many years, we had dreams that made us alive. What do you do when all your dreams come true? Our big challenge today is the fact that we have to deal. By the way, in China, that is a curse. May your dreams come true. And part of the problems we're living today in Israel, what do we do? The greatest threat we have when your dreams become a reality is that you can't dream anymore. We need a new dream that goes beyond independence and sovereignty and goes beyond emancipation. And these two great civilizations, these two great Jewish communities, American Judaism that fulfilled one dream, Israeli Judaism that fulfilled another. If I'll go back to my kitschy remarks in the beginning, that we have to build a partnership. A partnership is based on an idea, and I think we level the playing field. Because now we have to figure out what is the next big dream that transcends sovereignty and emancipation. And by the way, it could be a Jewish dream. Maybe the next big dream shouldn't be only about the Jews. Thank you.
Just one last word to bring this session to a close. That same poll that we've been talking about with all the gaps that exist, the same AJC poll also says 79% of U.S. Jews believe that a thriving Israel is vital for the long-term success of the Jewish people. 78% of Israelis believe that a thriving diaspora is important for the long-term future of the Jewish people. So in our hearts, we both know that we need each other, and the question is how to navigate through that and make that work. Hopefully, some of the suggestions and ideas that we've heard from our wonderful panelists can be a basis for a strategy moving forward, and hopefully when we get together at the next AJC Global Forum in Israel, whether in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, hopefully we'll be talking about the progress that we've made on this new strategy to strengthen the relationship. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.